So, welcome to today's sessions on Not Another Diet, a health hormone longevity approach. And it's a science backed approach on how to live and feel longer and not just look better short term. So, this might be sounding familiar, or look familiar. You might be bulging at certain parts where you don't want to be bulging, maybe losing hair, maybe you're tired. And maybe you're just completely overwhelmed with all the different health information out there, different supplements. Should you be doing a juice cleanse? Should you be doing an infrared sauna or an infusion? And you're just very confused. So today we'll look at all of that and what actually makes sense rather than doing another diet that might just be very restrictive and short term, and then you fall off the wagon again. We'll look at what can you do to support your whole body in the long run. How can you nourish your metabolism, your hormones, so that it doesn't just make you lose some weight right now, but it also makes you feel better and stay healthy long term. So we'll look at how symptoms now, such as it can be anything from achy joints or hair loss or hot flashes or tiredness, headaches, migraines, period problems, how that is all linked to potential symptoms down the line that we really don't want to have, such as frailty and serious symptoms like Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis as we get older. They're actually all interconnected, and I'll show you today how that's all connected and what you can do today to prevent those things. Okay, a little bit about myself. My name is Mirthe. I'm a functional medicine practitioner. I am licensed with the HCPC, so I'm a licensed practitioner. I came to all of this through my own journey of Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune disease that attacks your gut. And I did an undergraduate in health science and then found research papers that showed me what to do to put it in remission. And that was over 15 years ago now, and it's been, knock on wood, in remission ever since. And then I trained in functional medicine, did a postgraduate to help other people as well take control of their health where maybe they feel like they've been failed by the normal medical system. And just a little disclaimer, everything I'm telling you today is not instead of going to your normal GP, your normal medical doctors. Is in addition, it's a complementary approach. So anything I'm telling you today, you can experiment with it. But if you have any actual symptoms, always make sure you go to your GP and get them checked out, that there's not something more sinister. So this is not instead of. Very important. Okay, so we'll also talk a little bit about how your body shapes can connect to your health and what certain body shapes might reveal about your inner health and your hormones. And a lot of people, I always find this a funny image to start with because a lot of people relate to them. It's very oversimplified. They usually all interconnect, but it's a funny way, and we'll talk about the different types in a second. Okay, so today's talk will go, and I just showed this image before as well. It's not about just feeling good now, but it's actually about extending our health span. So this is from a research paper, and it's not about just living longer, where the last century medical research has shown us how to live longer, but oftentimes that comes with living unwell for many years. And there's a lot of research now into longevity science on how to actually feel better and be healthy for a longer time, meaning increasing health span so that we live not only longer, but also with optimal well-being and feeling better long term. Okay, so we'll try and increase that health span, that interconnection between physical well-being, living longer, but also feeling better, meaning not just to add life to your years, but to also not to just simply add years to your life, but to add life into those years, feeling better for longer. Okay, so you might be thinking, and the ones that have joined my workshops in the past, they know a few of the slides are same that I always run because I find them so important. And people used to think that a lot of their health is determined by their genetics. But research actually it's been always 2 decades now, but in particular, over the last decade, they've shown that actually it's a lot about it's something called epigenetics, what's around our genes that determine our health outcomes. So it's not so much only about what genes we inherit, but the epigenetics around the genes, and I'll talk a little bit more about what they are in a moment, they can decide which genes get turned on and which genes get turned off. They've done a lot of twin study research, so identical twins, same genetics, and they have them in different environments. And one twin might develop health issues where the others the other doesn't, even though they have the same genes. And it all comes back to that epigenetics, the lifestyle, diet, environmental pollutants, all the things that bathe our genes. They get to decide what turns certain genes on and off. So that becomes very empowering. It's that whole nature versus nurture debate. And they found that nurture, what we do and how we live and what surrounds us, is actually very important. How we live, how well we are, and how we look and feel. Okay, so this is a few of this just very sciencey things to start with so that you get a bit of an understanding what we're dealing with here. Now, there's this part of science called geroscience. It came out of Silicon Valley, where they're looking at living longer and better. Obviously, they're taking it to the next level of trying to optimize everything of the humans. But what they found, and there are geroscience departments all over the world now in different universities, and they do research into what makes us age, but not just what makes us age, but what makes us decline. And they found where they used to think that all these different health age-related illnesses such as Parkinson's and heart disease, Alzheimer's, they used to think that they all have separate factors that lead to them. They've now found that actually they have similar underlying factors, that if we address those, we slow all these illnesses, plus we slow age-related problems overall. So they now even call aging a disease as such. And they have all these fancy names, but we'll look at some of them in a more functional way today. All these underlying factors here that are leading to degradation in the long run, things like Alzheimer's and heart attacks. But in the short run, like I said before, there are similar things that lead to belly fat and hair loss and fatigue and migraines. They actually are they're the similar things. All these underlying factors like inflammation, like oxidative stress from free radical damage. You might have heard about these things. Or they also added dysbiosis, which is our gut microbiome. We'll talk about all of these factors and how we can influence them in our day to day so that we don't run into these issues down the line, or we at least wait longer, we extend our health span until certain things might happen. Okay, so research often then, if they find something, they think, okay, let's develop a drug to block certain pathways. So there are drugs out there that try and block these different pathways. They often have potential side effects. What we'll talk about today is actually a functional medicine approach. Now, functional medicine is kind of the interconnection between normal medicine and science and naturopathic medicine and nutrition science. It's very science-based, but it looks at always at the root cause. What's actually triggering these factors? So if we are looking at, let's look at, wait, where's the image that I wanted to show you? Here, those underlying factors. Functional medicine looks at what is actually causing them in the first place. What is causing that inflammation that has been linked to Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes? What are causing these factors? So in today's lesson, that's what we'll be talking about. Let's go back to that. I look at it a little bit like the people that have joined my sessions before, they know this. I look at the body a little bit like a cogwheel machinery. Lots of cogwheels, and if they run smooth, everything runs smooth inside of us. That means our metabolism is good. We don't add extra belly fat. We feel good. We have energy. We sleep well. Our hormones function. And if you throw in little bits of sludge and sand, eventually that whole cogwheel starts to slow down, and then eventually it'll start to just stop. And then we have a full-blown disease. But that happens decades later. So we will be looking at all these low-grade problems that slowly build up sludge in that cogwheel machinery that short-term will lead to symptoms that you don't feel so good right now, but long-term they then lead to the big problem. So if we address them now before they're a big problem, we're in a much better place. And it's also much easier to reverse before it's fully broken. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit. First half roughly is all about understanding what are these underlying factors, where do they come from, how are they hormones, inflammation, how are they all interconnected? And then we'll talk about some simple dietary and lifestyle adjustments and tweaks that you can do straight away so you can walk away from today's session with some empowering tools. And then also some simple supplements you can start taking and some testing that might get you to understand a little better what's actually going on inside your body. Okay, I want you to become the CEO of your own health journey. Okay, so we'll look at these underlying root factors. That's where functional medicine really shines. And what they found is that you have all these underlying causes, but the ones that, when you really get down to it, the ones that really block things up are inflammation, blood sugar imbalances, stress, not having the right building blocks, and an overwhelmed cleanup system. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of them in a moment. So, how is that linked to looking good? I know some of you joined today about with the dietary aspect in mind. Today, we're not talking about losing weight overall because that has a lot to do with how much one eats. We're looking more about body composition and shape and health, how that's interconnected. So, oftentimes, this apple shape is linked to someone that might not be overall overweight, but they're keeping that weight around the waistline. They're having that muffin top, that apple shaped body. And the ones that have listened to these talks before, they know that there's a bit more underlying than it's not just a vain concern, it's actually a real problem. They found that people with an apple shaped type are at a higher risk of developing in the short run PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, women in their reproductive years. And then also worse perimenopause symptoms, more hot flashes and things like that. And then short term as well, cravings, binge eating, immune system problems, ADHD, mood swings. But then long term, this apple shaped type has been linked to a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease or cancers or cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, all these things, hypertension that we want to prevent. So we will look at how we can help that belly fat now, and how that will then also help us long term reduce symptoms and prevent. Okay, so research shows that there are three main causes to that particular apple shaped type, and they're insulin resistance, stress, hormones, and inflammation. Now, when these three things are out of balance for long term, not just for a day, but longer term, the brain starts to send signals to the belly to store fat around the waistline. And we will talk about where this insulin resistance, the cortisol, the stress biology, and the inflammation might be coming from, so that if we address them, hopefully that belly fat can go away or at least reduce. Because as I just showed, that belly fat, that apple shape, is linked to a lot of health, bad health effects down the line. So we don't want that, not just from a vain perspective. Okay, so inflammation. A lot of people have heard of that word by now. It's actually a good thing. We need inflammation. It's our immune system's way of getting rid of infections and healing wounds. So when there is an infection like a virus or a bug or a cut, the body sends immune cells and produces inflammation to heal it, to get rid of the infection, to heal the cut. It's only a problem if that starts to linger and becomes chronic. And research has shown that inflammation has been linked. And you'll see in the end of the session that a lot of it I'll keep repeating the same things. So you can see that a lot of the factors that are linked to inflammation are similar to the factors that I just linked to belly fat and the apple shape. So PCOS, anxiety, endometriosis is an inflammatory condition, eczema, belly fat, joint aches, trouble sleeping, acne, short term, and then down the line, Alzheimer's, metabolic syndrome, including high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune conditions, cancers, and increased all-cause morbidity. So you can see inflammation is really something that the acute one to fix an infection or heal a cut, great. Long term, we want to get to the bottom of it because it increases the belly fat accumulation. So it messes with your metabolism. You feel all puffy, but it actually messes with a lot more than that. And sadly, a lot of people, they only care about their looks, but actually the way I like to look at things is if you just fix your inside and you heal and nourish yourself, then usually your looks will take care of themselves as well. So today we'll look a lot more at what's actually going inside you from a health perspective, but then I'll also always point towards how that will make you look better on the outside as well. Okay, so I was talking about before how functional medicine always looks at where is this inflammation coming from, because Normal medicine will say, okay, we know inflammation leads to all these things, so let's give it an anti-inflammatory drug to get rid of that inflammation. That is the natural way. Or then you go to a naturopath or a nutritionist and they'll say, take some anti-inflammatory supplements, do an anti-inflammatory diet, do all these anti-inflammatory tricks. But I always, with functional medicine, like to look a little deeper and say, why is there that chronic inflammation? There's usually a reason for that. And some of the reasons are usually chronic infections. I talked about how acute infection will increase inflammation, but if that infection for some reason hasn't gone away, it'll cause low-grade inflammation. So, for example, if we have an imbalance in our gut microbiome, a lot of people have heard about the gut and the importance of that these days. We have bacteria in the gut. We need the right balance in there. If we have too many bad ones, they can cause inflammation. If we don't have enough good ones, it can also cause inflammation. Or if we have mold, the really common one here in the UK, if there's mold damage in buildings, it's like an infection. It can infect our inside. And some people, they're just genetically a little weaker towards that and more prone. Then that can cause low-grade chronic inflammation. And you can test for all these things. And we'll talk about tests a little bit at the end. But everything I'm touching upon today, you can actually measure these things. And that's the functional medicine approach to health and longevity, not just guessing these things, but actually measuring. Are there chronic infections? What's my gut microbiome doing? Is there mold inside my system? Another common reason for chronic inflammation is hidden food intolerances. And that is one that I see all the time as well, is that people have food intolerances to foods they think are healthy and that would normally be healthy, but for whatever reason the body has decided that it doesn't like it. And then every time you eat that food, it will create inflammation because the immune system can't really distinguish between an infection or a food that it thinks is attacking it. And very common ones are, for example, eggs or cow dairy or gluten, but it doesn't have to be. So I test this in all my clients and patients because oftentimes people don't have a dairy problem and I don't want to cut them. I don't want to cut out dairy if they don't have a problem with it. And some people don't have a gluten problem, so then you don't have to cut it out. So oftentimes it can be hidden food intolerances to healthy foods like eggs, like almonds, or tofu or things like that. They can be, the body might have mistakenly classified them as a problem, and then every time you eat them it causes low grade inflammation, and that will create that puffiness around the waist, keeping weight, but also degrade your whole system long term. Not enough omega 3s is another common reason for omega 3 for inflammation. Omega 3s are mostly found in fatty fish like salmon and sardines, and most of us don't get enough of that. And we actually need omega 3s to stop inflammation. So let's say there is an infection, we pump out inflammation, but then we need something called resolution. We need the inflammation to stop, and we need omega 3s to do that. And if they aren't enough, and I test a lot of my patients in that as well, most people or everyone pretty much, unless they supplement, doesn't have enough omega 3 because of our environment. Abdominal fat in itself can also cause inflammation, so it becomes this vicious cycle. When you're inflamed, you start to produce more abdominal fat, but if you have a lot of abdominal fat around the waistline, in particular around the organs, that visceral fat, then that in itself starts to produce more inflammation. So it becomes this vicious cycle that you need to get in. Also, anything in the environment that the body can't really recognize, any pollutants, anything synthetic, any ultra processed foods, anything that the body doesn't know what it is, it thinks it's attacking it, and it will create inflammation to try and fight it off. And also a lot of sugar. So we'll talk about sugar in a lot more detail in a second, because as you remember, the apple shape, that abdominal weight, is usually linked to insulin problems, inflammation, and stress biochemistry. Now, insulin is the hormone that stabilizes our blood sugar and helps get sugar into the cells. So there's usually an insulin problem if there has been a blood sugar issue for a long time. A lot of people get hangry. It's a kind of a word that people joke about because it is so common. They get so hungry that they get angry because a lot of people on this blood sugar roller coaster. They ate in the first thing in the morning, they have a porridge with some honey and some fruit, or they have a piece of toast with jam. It spikes their blood sugar, gives them energy, but then it drops right after. It's called reactive hypoglycemia, where the blood sugar drops as a reaction to the previous really high one. And then they feel like they need to have food. They're starving, and then they need to have more again. So then they start to have this blood sugar roller coaster all day long. If that happens short term, it causes a lot of issues. Let me just mute everyone on here. And if the blood sugar has a spike short term, it causes something called advanced glycation end products, which you can see this piece of toast. This is what happens to us every time we have a sugar spike. It rusts us and makes us all, it basically degrades our tissues from the inside. When the sugar called glucose attaches to our cells, we're mostly made out of protein and fat in the body, it causes advanced glycation end products. And they don't go away until that cell is removed and regenerated, which can be months. And they basically make us rust from the inside out. Now, on the inside, that has been linked to a lot of issues such as high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's issues. But on the outside, they can also for example, contribute to wrinkles. So obviously today we're all talking about inner health, how that's linked to outer health and looks, but also well-being. So if we have lots of blood sugar spikes, it can also contribute to us not looking so well on the outside. But long term, it can make our cells less able to respond to the sugar spikes, and that can cause insulin problems. And that has been linked to that apple shape where we start to store weight around the waistline. So I see this a lot in my skinny fat patients. Skinny legs, skinny arms, but they have this muffin top. They might not be eating a lot, but when they eat, it's something carby because they might be vegans. They might be thinking they're doing the right thing. They have tiny bit of salad with no protein for lunch and maybe a piece of toast. But so basically all they get is carbs with a big blood sugar spike. And then even though they're not eating, it goes right to the waistline because the brain sends signals to store fat around the waist every time we have blood sugar spikes and when the insulin starts to not respond as well anymore. Third one for that apple-shaped type is stress. Now, I always like to refer to the rushing woman syndrome. Someone else has coined that term. I can't remember who it was, but they basically talk about the rushing woman syndrome because women often rush around so much and they're so stressed because they're trying to juggle everything. Obviously, men have a similar situation, but women are sometimes a little bit more susceptible to the hormonal imbalances that follow. And in particular, when we're talking about cortisol, the stress hormone, how that's linked to our weight and our muffin top, the waistline. Research shows, similar to inflammation and blood sugar issues, when we're stressed, the body will redistribute the fat to the waistline. So we can have skinny arms, we can have skinny legs, but it will go to the waistline. And also sometimes around the back there, around the bra strap. That's where the fat goes when we're stressed, when we're inflamed, and when we have blood sugar issues. Also, it's been shown that when we're really stressed, our mechanisms and our coping mechanisms become more reactive rather than proactive. So we'll all of a sudden, our brain, we have different parts of the brain. We have the prefrontal cortex, that is our rational decision making part of the brain. And then we have the back of the brain, which is more of our ancestral survival part of the brain. If we're stressed, we shut off our prefrontal cortex and we can't make rational decisions. We might have some chicken and some broccoli at home, but if we're really stressed, it's really hard to make the right choice and eat that and not the really highly palatable fries with maybe some chicken wings and some chocolate chip cookies or whatever it is that is around, because it's much harder because we're not turning on the right part of the brain. But that stress has also been shown to be linked to, similar to the ones I was talking about before, metabolic syndrome. It messes with our immune system, it messes with our sleep, it lowers our digestive health, it leads to worsened perimenopause symptoms and just causes all-cause morbidity. Now, our healthy, and this is really important, this part, this, you see this chart down here, the blue line is our cortisol. Because oftentimes people, they come into my practice and they say, oh, I must be really high in cortisol. And that's obviously a bad thing because it's frying my body. And they think all cortisol is bad. That's not quite the truth. Similar to inflammation, actually. So what we want this blue line, this cortisol, we want to spike first thing in the morning. This is really important. It kickstarts our metabolism. It also kickstarts our immune system, so it gets rid of cancer cells and it stops it from overproducing autoimmune cells, and it gives us energy. But then we need that to taper off throughout the day so that we can then, the red line is melatonin, so that we can then have a nice restful sleep. Now, what happens a lot of the times, let me see if I have a chart for that. Yeah, here. Oftentimes, when people are chronically stressed, they don't have a good spike in the morning, but then it stays too high in the afternoon. And research shows that it is not just about cortisol being present that causes all these issues, but it is if cortisol is present either constantly or at the wrong times of the day. So if we have low cortisol in the morning, which a lot of people that have been stressed for a very long time, that are on the verge of burnout, they actually don't have enough cortisol in the morning. They are more prone to a sluggish metabolism, to autoimmune disease, to cancers. But if the cortisol is too high in the afternoon, it basically just fries our body and it makes us store anything that we're eating, that we're looking at, it makes us store it because it distributes everything to the waste. So it's very important to have the right circadian rhythm, that daily rhythm. It's all got to do. I could talk hours and hours about all these different things, so I'll just touch upon a few things today. But it has a lot to do with our sleep pattern as well, and the sleep then helps with our Alzheimer's prevention and flushing everything out. But if the cortisol is out of whack and we don't get a good night's sleep, the next day we're more tired and we might be eating more because we're tired, but it also, if the cortisol is too high during the night, we can't get a good restful sleep, and then we can't flush out any toxins and stored protein and plugs from the brain, which over decades can contribute to Alzheimer's, for example. So they're all interconnected. Now, where it becomes a little bit more interesting is that the body can't really distinguish between what a real stressor is and what is perceived. So, for example, if we ruminate, if we think about stress or stressful situations, we produce a similar stress biochemistry to when there is an actual deadline at work or a difficult situation with a loved one or whatever the emotional life stressors are. But also, it could be physical stressors such as what I was talking about earlier, food intolerances or infections or pollution in the environment, mold toxicity, heavy metals. Overtraining is also a really common stressor. All of those act like a tiger on the system, where the body thinks there's a tiger chasing us. I must be pumping out stress biochemistry, which will fry us from the inside, which will make us store more weight around the waist, even though we're trying our best to eat the right things, but we're just so stressed. So eventually the body will store the weight around the waist. And if that happens long term, we don't have a spike in the morning anymore, and then we run into more serious issues. Okay, so toxic load can also cause a lot of stress on the system. Now, all of that, I talked about how insulin resistance, the constant long-term blood sugar spikes and dips, this cortisol curve, if that's disbalanced, inflammation, that all leads to that visceral fat accumulation where the fat goes to the belly instead of the limbs. And even if you're overall slim, so I see this very commonly. If someone comes into me and says, I'm not overall, I'm slim, but I can't budge that weight, I'll always say, let's look at where's this inflammation coming from? What's your stress rhythm? Stress is often a difficult one to deal with, but looking at where's this inflammation coming from is a really big one. And we can test all of that. Like I said before, we can test for hidden food intolerances, we can test for gut microbiome issues, we can test for mold, we can test for all of that. Okay, now these cortisol imbalances, if we're really stressed, they will also have knock-on effects on other systems in the body. For example, this funky looking curve is for the women that are still in their menstruating years. This is our monthly cycle. We have all these hormone fluctuations throughout the months. Now, Oftentimes, women run into issues during their reproductive years if that is out of whack. If they don't have enough, you can see the blue line here is progesterone, the yellow line is estrogen. If they don't have enough progesterone in that second half of the phase when it should be high, or they have too much estrogen in the second part of the cycle, they will run into issues, and it's called estrogen dominance. This is just one of the typical symptoms. So I'm just very, I'm simplifying everything today just for timing reasons. But what this will lead to is something called the pear shape. Again, very simplified. All of these usually interconnect. But oftentimes when women come to me and they have this pear shape, they have water weight around there in their thighs and in their, they have just this lots of weight down there. That can often be the underlying reason, or one of the factors contributing to it can be estrogen dominance and not enough progesterone. So here we want enough progesterone, and we want to make sure that estrogen doesn't go too high. So in stress can be one of the factors that can mess with that. If we're really stressed around ovulation, the body thinks it's not safe to make a baby, even if if that's not our goal. And then we don't ovulate properly, and then we don't make the right hormones in that second part of the cycle. So that is just one of the factors, but one of the biggest factors that messes with our cycle. Okay, estrogen dominance, just briefly, because I know some of the women listening today, maybe they're past those days, but I don't know who else is joining or is listening and watching the recording. So let's quickly touch on that, because all of what I'm talking about today is not just about how we feel right now, but what other health issues could be related to it. So I was talking about the apple shape, how that's linked to other health issues. If we have that pear shape and we are estrogen dominant, that can be linked to hormonal issues like PMS, painful periods, endometriosis, cysts and fibroids. They can have problems with fertility, a higher perimenopause chaos, and even a higher cancer risk. So those are just some of the symptoms that are often connected to estrogen dominance. And also, and we won't go into details of estrogen today, but it's also often linked to how the body's breaking down estrogen that can make the situation a lot worse. Okay, perimenopause. Again, I don't know if anyone that's listening to this today is in that state of listening to recording, but all these factors that I mentioned before, the inflammation, the blood sugar, and the stress, they will also worsen perimenopause symptoms. They found that hot flashes are actually often linked to not just hormone imbalances during perimenopause, but actually stress and blood sugar spikes and dips. And because our hormones fluctuate during perimenopause, our system will be more vulnerable to any blood sugar spike and dip, or more vulnerable to any stress, adrenaline, cortisol spike and dip. So where before the body was able to deal with it, all of a sudden our temperature gauge in the body narrows because of hormones that decline. And then any blood sugar spike and dip, any stressor can can give us hot flashes a lot more than before. Another one that I want to just touch upon is that oftentimes when women were stressed, and this, I know the people that I can see today, they might be relating to this slightly more. Now, oftentimes post-menopause, obviously the ovaries stop producing estrogen. Now, when we are in the reproductive years, during our cycles, our ovaries produce estrogen, but also our adrenal glands produce a little bit of estrogen, and also other parts of the body to small amounts. When we are in menopause, the ovaries stop, but if our adrenal glands are healthy, they will take up some of the slack and they will produce some estrogen, nowhere near the amount of before, but they will produce some of it. Now, and the adrenal glands also produce the stress hormones, the stress biochemistry like adrenaline and cortisol. So if women have had decades of stress leading up to their menopause, the adrenal glands will not be able to take up some slack and produce that estrogen. So then all of a sudden there's no estrogen in the system and we have a lot of issues. And then the body will also start to produce a little bit more fat around the waist because fat cells can also produce estrogen. So it just tries to compensate. This is not the biggest factor. The belly fat is mostly due to inflammation and stress and blood sugar issues, but that is one tiny factor that contributes to it. So I'm actually a big fan of low dose hormone replacement therapy for women that have low hormones because our body can't naturally, or for most women that have had a westernized lifestyle, they just have gone through too much stress. So the body post menopause is not able to produce that small amount of estrogen that we need to keep our body healthy, our brain, our bones, but also keep our waistline slim because they've been too stressed. So, helping with a little bit of very controlled hormone therapy, making sure you measure so you don't overdo it. Sadly, a lot of doctors just prescribe it without measuring. Not a fan of that. Make sure you test it so you get the right amount to get you to a good level. That will also help with your overall health, but also your belly fat. Okay, the I also quickly touch up on this one just to make it more complete because I had this imagery in the beginning of the different body shapes. There's also the potato shape, which often has to do with more of a thyroid issue. Now, again, I said this before, they're all interconnected. If one has insulin problems or blood sugar issues, that often also connects, that messes with our thyroid. If someone had thyroid issues, it can often link towards more of an apple shape as well. So they're not separate, they're all connected. We're just making it a little bit more, they're more just, if someone has an apple shape, they're more prone to these things. And if someone has a potato shape, they're more likely to be that way. But if someone has a sluggish metabolism and a sluggish thyroid, that can often lead to that potato shape because their whole metabolism is slowed down. So this is not the people that have just weight around the waist, but that's people that are just overall heavy and they feel like they're not actually eating that much, but they're just everything, their body's heavy and their metabolism is slow and everything they eat just stays on their system. They're feeling low mood, they're constipated, maybe their cholesterol is creeping up. Those are all signs of hypothyroidism. But even if your thyroid markers were normal in blood testing, research shows that even if you have normal thyroid hormones, but they are at the low end of the range, that can already contribute to these symptoms. So, and I'll talk about testing at the end of the session, but I always look at are all these markers not just in the normal range, but are they in the optimal range? And then oftentimes there's also a autoimmune component to this. When people have a sluggish thyroid, there could be autoimmune thyroid markers such as thyroid peroxidase, and they're basically factors where your immune system is attacking your own thyroid. And oftentimes that's not being picked up because we obviously all know the state of the NHS. Doctors just don't test for it. They don't have the capacity. They mean well, they want to, but often they just don't have the time for it. So often it's just missed for that reason. And even if it's tested, it's a similar thing. If there are thyroid autoimmune markers, oftentimes for it to be really flagged at a doctor, it must be a full-blown autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's or Graves'. But even if they're not that high, but they are on the high end of the normal range, they can already cause a lot of damage in the system and really make our whole immune system, whole metabolism sluggish. But also, you can see long term, it can cause kidney and nerve disease. Long term, it can cause problems with the insulin signaling. So then we're going back to that whole apple shaped type again that had all to do with blood sugar and insulin. So they're interconnected. Okay, so how is all of that linked to long term health and longevity? Obviously, I've interconnected it all the time. So it's really important to not just look after how you look right now, but whatever you want to do, in my opinion, you want to nourish yourself so you feel good right now, you look good, you have a slim waistline, all of that. But that will also help you long term if you do it right, if you look at these underlying factors so that you don't have to end up in a hospital bed for too long, hopefully. Okay, so again, which type are you? This is just a funny one. Okay, so that was just some of the underlying biology so you understand the next steps of we're now going to the more practical steps for today's session of what you can actually do. And this is what a lot of people think they need to do to be healthy. They think they need to go and do ice baths and saunas and have very expensive infusions and they have to take 1,000 different supplements. And while those are all beneficial, they really are. And this is what I always go back to this pyramid. And it's not as sexy as the funky, fancy infusions that a lot of companies obviously sell. It's a huge markup on them, so they make a ton of money. They do work, but they're not, they are basically the tip of the iceberg. What really is important is what do we do day to day? Do we have inflammation? Are we nourishing our cells? Do we get sleep? Are we stressed? Do we have stress hormones at the right time of the day? All these things are actually much more important. And then at the top of that pyramid, we can have those fancy tools, but it's really about what we do day in day out that is much more important. And also we'll talk about this big part of the pyramid today. I call them the 12 cornerstones, and then we'll talk a bit more also about some bespoke adjustments and testing. Okay, so we'll look at the root causes, the basic pillars that actually make up the majority of health or disease. And then the important part is that I always preach an 80-20 rule. You don't have to be 100% perfect all the time. A, it takes the fun out of life. And B, it stresses us out, which has a bad effect. We saw that before. So you can live a little bit, and I'll explain that in a moment. Okay, so the basics, we'll talk about diet a little bit, then we'll talk about lifestyle, and then we'll talk about supplements and testing. Okay, cornerstone number one, and this will all make a lot of sense now because we talked about what if these things go wrong, what they can cause in the body. So the first step is to balance our blood sugar. Instead of having these blood sugar spikes and dips I talked about before, we want to have our blood sugar really nice and steady for the majority of the time, because then we don't have all that cellular rusting and damage. Remember that piece of toast that happens when we have these spikes. We want this to just be nice and steady. Now, how we get to that is that we want to base our meals on vegetables and protein, and we want to have a little bit less carbs. So rather than cutting out carbohydrates and sugars entirely, that is not necessary, and we actually need a little bit of carbohydrates. And just a note, some people are unaware that carbohydrates actually turn into sugar inside the body. So they're basically sugars like table sugar goes into the body a lot quicker. But even potatoes, even oats, porridge, they are a lot slower, but they still turn into sugar. So you could have a porridge in the morning and it might spike your blood sugar. But if you have a little bit of porridge and you combine it with protein, so lots of nuts and seeds, and you have some fat with it, some coconut oil or olive oil, then it will actually, and I've seen this in people, then it might not spike you. So the best way to figure out what actually works for your biology, because everyone is a little bit different and what spikes their blood sugar and what doesn't, is actually to wear one of these blood sugar monitors that a lot of people have seen people wearing nowadays. You have these little white patches. You can buy them on Freestyle Libre yourself. They're not that expensive, maybe £50 roughly. And you can wear them for 2 weeks, and then you can see on an app on your phone what different foods do to your blood sugar. And if you're interested in that, there's research. The app is actually for diabetics, so the range on the app is quite big because they're just looking for emergency blood sugar spikes and dips. What we're looking at, we're trying to optimize health. So we want that range to be a lot narrower. So if you're interested in that, you can, at the end of the session, you can reach out to me. I'll give you my email. Oh, there's my email address. You can email me and I can send you a PDF on how to narrow the range to optimal. So you can do that all by yourself. And then you can just experiment how you need to shift the proportions of your meals to keep your blood sugar steady, because it is slightly different for everyone. If we're a little bit more stressed, the body responds to sugars differently to when we're relaxed. If we had a bad night of sleep, the body responds differently. Some people have eaten lots of sugars all their life, so now their cells don't respond as well anymore, so they respond differently. So there's lots of factors that play into that. So there is no one size fits all, but the goal is to have a really nice, steady, optimal blood sugar for the majority of the time. And the main reasons or the main factors that contribute to that are increasing your vegetables, fiber, protein, and then just reducing the carbohydrate content. And then you also want to, and that's cornerstone number 2, is prioritize protein. That'll help with your blood sugar, but it'll also give your body the building blocks it needs to stay healthy. It will give your body the building blocks it needs to produce muscle. And a lot of people have heard nowadays how important muscle is for long-term health. It's a metabolic organ that helps with reduce inflammation. It helps our whole body stay healthy as we get older. And it's actually a lot higher than what we used to think we need. And I have a protein calculation sheet that I can send to the ones that are interested as well. If you send me an email, because I don't have your email addresses, they stay with the Life Center for data purposes. So if you want any of this, just reach out to me so I can send everything to you. Um, you want to go for at least 1.5 gram of per kilogram of your goal body weight. So you want to pick a healthy BMI, a healthy body weight goal, and then take that times 1.5, and then you get your protein grams. We don't have time to go into a lot more detail today, but I have this protein calculation cheat sheet that you can have if you want. Okay, cornerstone 3 is you want to have periods of time when you don't eat. So I'm talking about intermittent fasting, which had a moment, I think it was 5 or 7 years ago. It was super trendy to not eat all day. But what research now shows is that even if you just, it's not about doing extreme fasts, which you can do once in a while to reset your body, but it's more about just having periods of time every day when you don't eat. And to some, that might be completely normal, but to a lot of people, that is not. A lot of people snack all day because 20 years ago, we were taught that that is how we keep our metabolism going. They now know that that is actually not the truth. It's not, that is actually a result of having constant blood sugar spikes and dips and us getting hangry. So we constantly need to fuel that. If we keep our blood sugar more steady, we can actually go longer without food because the body then learns how to tap into our own fat stores. Now, what they found is if we have meals and we don't snack between, our body can also clean up in between. It can clean out the gut. It can start to tap into its own fat stores. It can reset the blood sugar balance, that insulin sensitivity. So it's very important. And it could be 2 or 3 meals a day. Research is not conclusive, whatever works best for your lifestyle. So either you have a late breakfast and an early dinner, so 2 meals a day, or you stick to the regular 3 meals a day. But no snacking, really important. That helps your body clean up so that you don't run into issues down the line, but it also helps your body tap into its own fat stores. And you will be able to do this without feeling hangry if you eat the way I said on the previous slide, more protein, more fiber, more good fats, then your body will be really nice and steady and you will not be starving in between meals. The other thing that research shows and where this fasting comes in is just not to eat at night. Again, this might sound really obvious to some, but a lot of people will eat really late in the evening and they might get up in the middle of the night and get a snack. And that is not good for us because research shows that even if we were to have the same meal, the same ingredients at, let's say, 6 p.m., or we have that at 10 p.m., it has a completely different effect on our metabolism, on our cortisol, but also on our cholesterol and triglycerides, all these fat lipid markers in the body. It has a different effect on our blood pressure, on our sleep quality. So ideally, the earlier dinner, the better. Ideally, no food after 7 p.m. Because what we want is we want 7 hours, sorry, not 7 hours, 7 p.m. We want 4 hours before we go to bed so that the body can digest, so that when we're asleep, the body can actually do its job of cleaning and restoring and recovering and doesn't have to digest. That will help us dip into a deeper sleep where the body then can flush out accumulated plugs from the brain, for example. So if we have the same dinner at 10 p.m., the body will digest the food at night. It will keep our heart rate elevated and it will stop us going into deep sleep. And in deep sleep, our brain shrinks a little bit. And then the lymphatic system in the brain is called glymphatic system. It can go into the brain and flush everything out from the day, including plaques, amyloid plaques, which if they accumulate over decades can contribute to Alzheimer's, but also all other sorts of daily metabolic waste products. It can just flush it all out and it can help us restore, recover. If we eat too late, that can't really work that well. Okay. Cornerstone number 4 is to think about, and I've mentioned this before, is rather than thinking, how can I lose weight and be skinny, think, how can I nourish my cells and my gut microbiome? We'll talk about this in a second, so that I can feel really well, that my whole metabolism, my whole hormones, my body works really well. And that as a side effect will help you drop that weight around the waistline rather than focusing on, oh, let me just starve myself to not eat, because then we won't be healthy. Someone can be skinny if they only eat a teaspoon of Nutella every day. They're not healthy, but they're skinny. So we're looking at how can I nourish my whole body so I stay healthy long term, all my cells get what they need while I'm boosting my metabolism and my body composition. Now, some of the important factors here, and I just added a few again, time wise. I can't mention everything, but a few important ones. For example, cruciferous vegetables. That's things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, bok choy. They are really important to help the body detox estrogen. But they also have building blocks for our joints and ligaments. They also help the liver detox other environmental toxins. Because our liver is wonderful and great at detoxing, actually, if we just give it the right tools. And a lot of people have that maybe a few times a week, but make that a daily thing. Omega 3s, I mentioned before, important to get rid of inflammation. So you get that from fatty fish. A note here is to avoid tuna. Tuna is high in omega 3, but it is also high in mercury. And mercury, sadly, is a heavy metal that causes damage in our body, in our brain, and our cardiovascular system. So the occasional tuna, maybe once a month, shouldn't be a problem. The body can get rid of that. But if we eat it every week, I test a lot of my patients for heavy metal load in their body, and everyone that's eating tuna more than every other week has heavy metals, mercury buildup. So then all of a sudden that omega 3 in the tuna becomes not that important because you're putting other poison inside your body. Iodine is really important, found in seaweed. It helps with our thyroid. It helps with oftentimes people develop fibroids and cysts. There are lots of factors that contribute to that. One of them is often a iodine deficiency as well. High fiber. So that's also gained a lot of traction in the last couple of years in the media, but it is actually quite important because fiber feeds our gut microbiome. And I mentioned in the beginning of the session that if our gut is out of balance, it contributes to inflammation. Now, most people should aim for 30 grams of fiber a day that will feed our good bacteria in the gut. However, because I work in clinical practice, so I see a lot of people that have issues with their gut and they might not actually be able to tolerate it. So just because something on social media says it's good doesn't mean it's good for everyone. If someone has an overgrowth of bacteria in the gut, then they might actually get a lot of bloating and inflammation from eating that amount of fiber. So they might initially work with someone to do a stool test, look what's going on inside there, fix the gut first, and then ramp up the fiber. And then eat the rainbow. It's a very old saying, but it really counts. If you get your plate to have lots of different colorful vegetables, you get all these different wonderful nutrients that we don't even know what's in them. There's so many different polyphenols, plant nutrients that if you were to look into research papers, every one of them has different benefits. So if you look at the purple color, it has these benefits for the heart and the eyes and the brain. So they're all wonderful. So just eat the rainbow, get a big variety. And then ideally also add in some seeds to help with our hormonal balance and hormone detox. Okay, so this is just a quick picture of what we eat, how that can actually influence our gut microbiome, and how whether we're more inflammatory or whether we're healthier. And there's some links to research papers that show that, for example, if our gut microbiome is imbalanced, that's been linked to higher Parkinson's problems or overgrowth of E. coli, for example, in the gut if we have more artificial sweeteners. So if we just go back to basics, eat a whole food diet, lots of wonderful nutrients, then we don't just fix our gut and any gut issues, but we also help our long-term health. Okay. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that I'm not a big fan of anti-inflammatory diets and tools, but I would like for you, if you think there's inflammation in your system, then you might want to make it a little bit more bespoke and actually look at what is causing the inflammation. And then it becomes a very bespoke anti-inflammatory diet. So look at your gut microbiome. Are there chronic infections? Is there candida, fungal overgrowth in the gut? I see this all the time in people. Or is there something called SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is where there are bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine where there shouldn't be that many bacteria. If you address them, then you'll be lower in inflammation. If you have hidden food intolerance, as I mentioned that in the beginning, even if they're healthy foods, let's say an almond or an egg, if you're reacting to them, they will inflame you all the time. So then you're trying to eat a healthy diet, an anti-inflammatory diet, but if you have hidden food intolerance, they will still inflame you all the time. And then you will keep that belly fat, you will keep the bloating and all these other symptoms that I mentioned. Have enough omega-3s and avoid ultra processed food and overeating. They all cause inflammation as well. Okay, I mentioned in the beginning, I'll just touch upon it again because I find it so important, that 80-20 rule. So I'm showing pictures here, a big family gathering or friends gathering, having a glass of wine. If you just think about how can I best nourish myself, 80% of the time, the body can handle 20% of drinking a little bit of a glass of alcohol if that makes you feel better with your friends or connect better, or have a piece of cake with your family members if that helps you feel more connected. It's not about, sorry, my nose is really stuffy today. It's not about completely restricting yourself all the time. It's about what can you do 80% of the time and then live a little bit as well, because that will help with your stress levels as well, which will actually be anti-inflammatory in the long run. So as a rule here, 80-20 rule, 6 days a week, roughly 5 to 6 days a week. You want to be lower in carbohydrates and sugars, higher in vegetables and protein. So you keep your blood sugar nice and steady. And nice meals like this. And then 1 day a week, just have whatever you want, whatever it is that you feel like you're craving and missing out on in life if you're not having it. So you can have your cake and eat it too. As long as it's not every day, as long as it's in the 80-20 rule, and also as long as you're not intolerant to any of these foods. So if someone comes to me and we test them in their blood and they have let's say, an egg intolerance or a gluten or a dairy, then I'll say, well, you might have to have an egg-free cake for the time being, even on your cheat day, because the inflammation of a food intolerance will linger for days, not just for that 1 day. Okay, that was diet. Now we'll talk about the lifestyle factors. And again, similar to we discussed the reasons. So this is all just it all makes sense now because we discussed why you shouldn't be doing them and how they have a bad effect on your system before. So cornerstone number 7 is just to keep it as pure and natural as possible. I said how any of these environmental pollutants and toxins can stress our body out, cause damage, cause stress, cause inflammation as well. So we want to reduce them whenever we can. Again, 80-20 rule. Don't stress about it, because if you stress about it and obsess about it, that can make you sick as well. So just whenever you can make changes, do them. So I always think the easiest is at home. You have it in your control. Try and have a good water filter. Maybe reduce the amount of takeaway coffee you have and take in the plastic mugs, and just have a stainless steel mug that you bring to your favorite coffee place. Maybe reduce or avoid the Nespresso capsules at home because they're full of aluminum. Maybe swap your scented candles or any other room scents or any kind of cleaning products. Swap them to natural ones, because a lot of the synthetic ones actually have been shown to mess with our system, mimic hormones, contribute to cancers. Same with deodorants, all the stuff we put on our skin. A lot of the normal products, the synthetic ones, are actually slightly toxic to us. So just switch to natural ones. And then when you go out once in a while and you have a bit of tap water with toxin in them, it's fine. Or if you go and you're going to a dinner party and there's certain things that are not that clean, it's not a big deal. It's more about what you do day to day. Okay, cornerstone number 8, big one, stress management. I talked about this whole importance of that healthy circadian curve. So obviously, one of the biggest things we can do to be healthy long term is to get that cortisol curve to work properly. We want a nice cortisol spike in the morning, and we want that to taper off in the day. So some of the factors that link to that is obviously take away whatever's stressing you too much. It's obviously easier said than done. So this is often a hard one to deal with. But simple ones that don't have too much coffee in the late part of the afternoon, or don't do a high intensity workout if it stresses you out in the late part of the day, but do these things in the morning. Do things that stress your body out first thing in the morning, and then try and have more nourishing things in the afternoon. And then obviously all the emotional stressors, they're harder to deal with. Things like infections, we talked about, they cause inflammation, but they also stress the body out. They're a little bit harder to deal with. In line with that, sorry, back to this curve here quickly. In line with this curve, that is also helps our circadian rhythm. So it's really, there's a lot of research now that looks at how our circadian rhythm, that cortisol curve, how that is really important to our overall health and longevity. And not just from that from the cortisol curve that I mentioned before, but it has a lot of other factors as well involved. They found that if we are in tune with nature, and when the sun comes up and when it goes down, it actually triggers certain parts of the body. The whole body has clocks in them. And if we do the right things at the right time, which is more in tune with natural living, then actually everything works much better. There's less inflammation and there's less stress hormone imbalances. We will also sleep better, which I've talked about a little bit in detail before, how that helps us. So you want to also get sunshine first thing in the morning, big one to set that circadian rhythm. Because if we get sunlight, bright light in the eyes, it actually triggers the whole circadian rhythm. And then we produce the right amount of hormones at the right time of the day where it becomes much easier. It helps with digestion, helps with inflammation, helps with gut health. So those are simple steps. There are lots of other factors, but those are just a few simple ones. Exercise. So because this is through the Life Center and the type of people that usually come through the Kensington, Notting Hill crowd, most people there know that they need to exercise. They often tend to over exercise, but I'll just quickly touch upon both. So, both of them are not a good thing. We want to exercise, really important for us for lots of reasons. One of the reasons also, it helps our stress hormones being metabolized. It helps our cells become more insulin sensitive, so we have less blood sugar issues. But if we over exercise, it actually turns into an issue. It turns into a stressor to the body, and it can actually mess with our stress response. It can actually make our body pump out too much sugar because the body thinks it's running away from a tiger all the time. And then the body produces sugar itself. The liver produces glucose, sugar, if it thinks there's a stressor behind it. So if we're constantly over exercising, so people that run marathons or people that exercise every day extensively and intensively, that can actually burn us out. So as a rule of thumb, if you're just unless you're an athlete, but if you're just looking to live healthy and look after yourself and look good, then daily movement, wonderful, 10,000 steps, that kind of thing, plus 2 to 3 times a day, a week, a higher intensity workout. Ideally, no more, and ideally, no more than 45 minutes, because research shows that if that higher intensity workout is more than 45 minutes, it actually turns into a bad stressor that rather than a good stressor that makes us stronger. Okay. Another one, quickly, that is, but is often overlooked, is that we actually, as we get older, we often, some of us exercise, but we get stiffer and stiffer. And they found that if we have this myofascial tissue in the whole body, connective tissue, that connects our organs, but also into our tendons and ligaments. And if that gets tighter, there's something called the lymphatic system that has a lot of our immune system in it and gets rid of toxins. That gets stuck and it can't circulate as well. So then, we get muscle knots and tension and pain, but also it contributes to inflammation because that lymphatic system, the immune system, gets stuck at certain parts of the body. We get bloating and water retention, but B, also it causes that low-grade inflammation. So I'm a big fan of doing anything that stretches everything out and gets rid of knots in the tissue. There can be obviously yoga or rolling on foam rollers or anything that helps it. There's also a place, I don't know who from you joining today is actually in the neighborhood of the Life Center, but there is a place on near Westbourne Grove that has this roller machine. Again, if you reach out to me, I can send you the link to it and the address to it. That just releases everything. It basically is a machine with infrared light and it massages your whole system. I'm addicted to it personally. I go at least once a week and it feels so good. It breaks up all the adhesions in your legs everywhere from exercising, from sitting, and it just breaks up the knots and gets all that lymph to just move, and it feels really good and it helps with long-term health as well. Okay, supplement one. People always ask about that one. Um, there are a few, so there are a few supplements that I believe everyone should be on, but there are actually not that many. And then there are a lot of extras that people could be taking. Now, let's first talk about the ones that I think everyone should be taking because we're just not getting enough of these nutrients through our diet or through the lifestyle we're living. First one is vitamin D. Now, unless you live in some tropical country, which obviously some people do, wonderful, lucky you. But if you live in the UK or anywhere else in Europe, in winter we just don't get enough vitamin D. And even in summer, we don't usually get enough to build up big stores, so we get depleted in winter. So everyone needs vitamin D with K2 in it, because the K2 is really important to help the body. Basically, when we take vitamin D, we absorb more calcium, but then we want to make sure that the calcium doesn't go into our arteries and cause problems there or into our joints. So the K2 helps with bringing that calcium into our bones and not into where it should go. Omega 3, I talked about before, unless you eat sardines and salmon 5 times a week, you might need to supplement with it. And also a good multivitamin. I test a lot of my clients for a lot of these things. So I've seen that no one that doesn't supplement is high enough in certain B vitamins, sadly, because our body burns through them, in particular folate. The body burns through them because of just stress and our lifestyles. We burn through them more, but then we don't get enough of them because, for example, folate, which is a B vitamin, it's mostly found in leafy greens and it degrades really quickly. So by the time it gets from the farm to our table, even if it's fresh, it doesn't have a lot of folate left. So most people just don't get enough of it, even if they eat lots of fresh vegetables all the time. So I always say it's really good to have a good multivitamin with good Bs in it. And I wrote down methylated Bs. Reason being is that a lot of the cheap multivitamins that we can get at Boots, for example, they will have synthetic B vitamins that don't actually, they can block our receptors in the body and don't really work that well. So you want to splurge a little bit, I think, if health is important, and get the ones that actually have the real version of it, the methylated ones that the body can absorb and utilize rather than blocking up our receptors. And also, one that I want to just add in here with that with methylated Bs is because it's become trendy again. A lot of people have heard about NAD possibly. It's become a thing in London. Everyone talks about it. Now, NAD is, a lot of people get injections for them because it's being touted as an anti-aging longevity nutrient. Now, it is true that a lot of us get depleted as we get older. Our body can make it itself, but as a precursor, it needs vitamin B3. So if you get a really good multivitamin with B3, you usually don't need to add extra expensive NAD because you have it. I test my patients for their NAD levels, and if they have a really good multi, they don't usually need to add extra NAD or just once in a while. Also, magnesium, most people, or it's just really hard to get enough from because the soils are depleted and we're stressed, so the body burns through it more. So, pretty much everyone benefits from a magnesium at night. It helps us sleep, helps us calm down, helps our blood sugar balance, helps our cortisol levels. So, that's a good one that I think everyone can be on. And vitamin C, everyone can be on because it's really hard to get that through diet as well. And it helps our immune system and hence our inflammation as well. So those are supplements that I would put anyone on without testing, basically. However, there are other supplements that people shouldn't just go on without having tested their levels. And a really common one is zinc. Reason I bring this up, there are lots of them, but zinc is a really common one that I always want to mention because I get a lot of clients come to me in the initial consultation and they've been on zinc or also selenium. I should probably put this in the slide actually. They've been on those supplements for decades. Some nutritionists put them on zinc or selenium saying it's good for your immune system. And that is true. But if you have, they actually build up in the body. And if there's too much of it, it will build up in the body and become toxic. And so I often, when these people come in and I measure them, their zinc or their selenium, they are sky high. So a good thing then becomes toxic. So there is a little bit of zinc and copper and selenium in the multi, but at a safe level. That is fine. Just don't take high dose extra zinc, copper, selenium supplements. Iron is another one. And I'll talk about iron a little bit more in a moment when we talk about blood testing. I won't mention this today. Don't just take iron unless you know that you need it. And then there's some other supplements that people could just play around with, take here and then, but they are not necessarily needed as such. So, for example, I talked about that NAD. If you get good quality vitamin B3 and you live a healthy life, then you don't necessarily need it, but you will. It's not a bad thing to have a bottle of the precursor called NMN and take it maybe once or twice a year, or have, if you want to be fancy, have an injectant once or twice a year, but you don't necessarily need to constantly do that unless you test that you're really low. Berberine helps with your blood sugar. Turmeric helps with inflammation. Ashwagandha helps with stress. Probiotics helps with your gut. Collagen helps with your skin. Creatine helps with your brain health and muscle health. But all of these are more optional. We're not deficient in turmeric, for example. Or when our gut microbiome is healthy, we don't need probiotics. Sometimes people even have too many gut bacteria. I talked about this in the past. Collagen, most people benefit. So I actually put most people on it nowadays because it's really hard to get through diet, but it's not one of the, you don't have to have it, but it's a good one. It helps with skin and joints and ligaments. Creatine, if you eat a lot of meat, you likely don't need to add creatine. But if you are more on the low meat and animal protein base, or if you're vegetarian or vegan, then you definitely need to have creatine because it helps with our brain health, muscle health, bone health. But even if you eat meat, having a little bit of creatine won't damage. Now, if you're interested in, and I always say this, I talk about that it's important to have the right types of supplements. I work with a provider called Mirthe for all my patients. I create bespoke supplement regimes for them. But for the ones that aren't my patients, so the people that just attend my workshops, I can still create a little basket with the maintenance ones that everyone can take at a 5% discount there. So you can just, if you're interested, again, email me. I can create that for you just with the basic ones, and you can order them at 5% off. And they're the good quality ones, so you don't get any synthetic fillers and anything like that. You get the good B vitamins, but I won't add anything extra in it because obviously I don't know your biology unless you're my patient. Okay, quick checklist of all these 12 cornerstones. And then we'll touch a little bit on testing. And I know we're running out of time soon, but I'll just keep going a little more and then I'll open up the questions. This is the one that I know that was of interest to some of you today. So if you really want to take it to the next level, because a lot of the people that come to see me, at least, they already know about the gut microbiome and they know about eating vegetables and exercising and sleep and all of those things. So if you're one of those, and like I say, that's, I would say, 99% of my client and patient population, then you might actually be saying, but I'm doing all these things, but it's still not quite working. That's where then you might actually want to take it to the next level and do some testing to really become the CEO of your health and be a lot more bespoke and targeted. So you can test. There's certain home monitoring tools which are wonderful nowadays. They weren't available just a few years ago. You can wear Apple Watches or Oura Rings. They can show you if you're stressed, how your sleep is, those kinds of things. So they're wonderful starting points. If they stress you out, which some people, they tell me they already know they can't sleep. So if they wear a sleep tracker, it'll just stress them out even more. So obviously don't do that. Use the things that empower you rather than stress you out. There is something called orthorexia where people over obsess about healthy living, and that in itself becomes a stressor. So all the things today, take it with a pinch of salt and only do the things that don't stress you out, because stress in itself is bad for you. So use it as an empowerment tool rather than something to worry about. But if you want to take it to the next level, you can do some testing. So oftentimes when people come and see me, I will tell them to just get a regular panel to start with. They can get it often from their GP, or they can go, if you're in London, there are lots of places called Randox where you can do a discovery panel that has a lot of basic markers in it, like vitamin D, folate, iron levels, hormones, thyroid autoantibodies. I mentioned all of these today. So they are basic markers that you can get at your GP if you just ask for it and if you have a nice GP, or you can go and get them done privately. I think it's roughly £200 if you go to Randox and do this yourself. It's called Randox Discovery Panel. Again, if you're interested, I can send you the link. Just email me after the session with whatever you want for me to send you through. Now, you can do all of these, but then the important part to them is actually, and I've mentioned this before briefly, is to look at them in a narrower range, because research shows that a lot of these ranges, similar to the blood sugar I mentioned in the halfway through the session, is that just because something is normal doesn't mean it's optimal. So, for example, ferritin, that's our iron storage molecule. It's also a marker for inflammation. Now, a lot of the reference ranges, if you go to a lab, usually their range will be somewhere around 15 to 300, depending on the lab, plus minus. Now, research shows for optimal health, we want it to be between 60 and 90. And you can see that's quite a narrow range. Now, if it is, and what ferritin shows is mostly an, like I said, iron storage molecule. If we are in the range but below optimal, it means our cells aren't getting enough iron, which means that our body can't make enough red blood cells, and the red blood cells are needed to transport oxygen to our cells. So even though you might not be anemic, your doctor might not flag it because maybe your ferritin, let's say, is at 20. I see this all the time, in particular in girls that are still having a reproductive cycle, because they lose blood every month. So they come to me and they're tired, hair's falling out, their thyroid is sluggish, their hormone is there because the thyroid also needs iron levels. The hair needs iron. So their iron ferritin is at a 20 or 25. So they go to the doctor and they say there's no problem. But actually their cells are starving of oxygen. So they will benefit from some extra iron, either through the diet or a supplement. On the flip side, however, as soon as it goes above 100, it becomes inflammatory. And I see this all the time in my male clients and in my clients that have been menopausal for a while. Because when you don't bleed anymore every month, your body starts to accumulate iron and red blood cells. Or the red blood cells go away, but the iron stays. And then all of a sudden that becomes inflammatory. They've been shown, or research has shown, that anytime ferritin goes above 100, it starts to slowly rust us from the inside. It causes inflammation, contributing to Alzheimer's, cancers, and cardiovascular disease. So all these things that we're trying to prevent. So measure your ferritin, see where it is. 60 to 100 is still good enough, 50 to 100. But anytime it goes below that, you're starving your cells. Anytime it goes above that, you're slowly creating rust in your body. And the easiest way, if it's above, is to donate blood on a regular basis. So you're just getting rid of some of that blood that's stored the iron. Okay, vitamin D, another example. Also, on most normal blood tests, the normal range in most labs, again, plus minus, is between 30 and 200. The optimal range and people often know about vitamin D for being important for energy levels, for our immune system, preventing cancers, autoimmune disease, just giving us good energy levels. For that to happen, it needs to be between 100 and 150. Now, again, I see a lot of people, they go to their GP, they say, I've had it tested, I'm fine, but they are maybe at a 50. So their body is starving of vitamin D. Similar thing to blood sugar balance. I talked about this before. If you do one of these blood sugar monitors, make sure you get the optimal range, and I can send you the optimal range if you email me. Because every time the blood sugar spikes above the optimal range, even though it's still in the normal range, it already causes micro damage to your blood vessels, in the brain, in the cardiovascular system, and it causes micro inflammation. There's research that shows every time there's a mini blood sugar spike, your immune system can't do its job of getting rid of cancer cells as well. It also causes inflammation in your blood vessels, which down the line over decades contributes to cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, Alzheimer's in the brain. So it's not about having to, we don't need to have this optimal all the time. Again, 80-20 rule, the body's perfectly capable of dealing with a little bit of damage. It can repair that. It becomes a problem if that happens all the time. And again, I see this all the time in my patients. I get all my patients to wear one of these nowadays because it's such a simple, cheap tool. And a lot of them have constant blood sugar spikes or lots of dips, and that can wake them up in the middle of the night and they don't know why they keep waking. They might have dips. So wear one of these monitors if you're interested. And then the next step, and I already alluded onto that in the session, if you want to go even deeper and look for, say, actually, oh, maybe there is some inflammation, maybe there are hidden food intolerances, maybe there's some environmental toxins, you can test all of that. So they all exist, but usually your regular GP or gastroenterologist might not have them. So you need to go to see a functional medicine practitioner that is specialized in these things. So you can also do DNA health testing to see where your weaknesses are. You can look at mold in your system, heavy metals, all these types of things you can measure. Okay, so if that's something of interest, so obviously just today's session, hopefully there are lots of takeaways just to start without even going any further. And hopefully it was helpful. Getting your protein right, your blood sugar, stress levels, all of that, hopefully that was empowering. If you say, I've done all of that and I want to dig a little deeper, then I have a lot of free content where I try and post a lot of information, educational things on all the different channels. So wherever people are, I post things on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. I also have a podcast where I don't post enough because of time reasons, but I try and be just little snippets of information. So if you found this interesting, you can go to those and just keep updating yourself with good, and everything's research based. So everything I put out there is not because some influencer said it or because some podcaster said it. Everything I say, I read all the research papers. So it's usually legit. If you want any more information of all the stuff I talked about, you can email me. And then if you struggle with that and you want to take it to the next level, you could see someone like me or me in person. I do one-on-one consultations where we do all of that, where we look at everything for you. Even if you don't have symptoms, if you just want to optimize, we can run all the tests. We decide on which tests work for you, for your budget, and then come up with a very personalized plan.